I cared for my grandson every day with love. One day, my daughter-in-law looked me in the eyes and said, "Come home earlier tomorrow so I can sleep a little more." I looked at her serenely and replied, "If you want to sleep more, hire a babysitter because I'm going away." Her laughter froze in the air. That morning, when I spoke those words, something inside me broke. Or maybe it finally mended itself. I was standing in my daughter-in-law Jessica's living room, my purse still hanging from my shoulder, my keys clutched in my right hand. It was 6:45 in the morning. Outside, it was barely dawn, and I'd already been awake since 5:30. Showered, dressed, my hair tied back in a braid that I'd done in the darkness of my room so I wouldn't waste a minute. Jess stood before me in her ivory silk pajamas that cost more than a month's worth of groceries. She held a cup of freshly brewed coffee in her hands. Her nails painted a flawless pale pink. Her hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders. She smelled of expensive moisturizer, the kind they advertise in magazines I never had time to read. She didn't offer me coffee. She never did. "She'll be home around 6:30 tomorrow." "Yes, Eleanor," she said without looking me in the eye, like someone talking to someone cleaning their house. "I want to sleep a little more. Last night I stayed up watching a series. I felt something rise in my throat. It wasn't crying. It wasn't shouting. It was clarity. A cold, luminous clarity, like when you open the window after days of confinement and the air hits your face. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw her relaxed posture, her indifference, the way she sipped her coffee while giving me orders, as if I were part of the inventory of her house. And something in me, she simply said, "Enough." "If you want to sleep more," I said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, "hire a babysitter. I'm going on a trip." The silence that followed was so thick that I could hear the kitchen clock tick, tick, tick. Her face changed, first incredulity, then a mocking smile that tried to form on her lips, but froze mid-smile. Her eyes searched me as if she expected me to laugh too, to say, "Just kidding, darling," that I was back where I belonged, but I wasn't there anymore. "Journey," she finally said in a tone that dripped with contempt. "At your age, Eleanor, don't be ridiculous." There was that word, ridiculous, as if my 67 years disqualified me from living. As if the fact that I was a grandmother had turned me into an object without desires, without the right to tire, without permission to say no. "Ridiculous I was," I replied as I took a step toward the door. "Taking care of people for free while you did your nails with my time." And I left. I closed the door behind me without turning around. My hands were shaking. My heart was beating so hard I could feel my pulse in my temples. But I kept walking. I went down the stairs of the building where they lived, those marble stairs that I had climbed so many times with sore knees, carrying bags of groceries that they didn't ask me to carry, but that I carried anyway. I went outside and the fresh morning air hit my face, and then I cried. I cried, standing there on the sidewalk, with the dawn light painting the sky orange and pink. I cried for all the wasted time, for all the times I said yes when I meant to say no. For every morning I arrived at 7, even though my body was asking me to rest. For every evening I canceled with my friends because Jess has a meeting. For every night I returned home with a broken back and an even heavier heart. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, and liberation, because in that moment, standing on that street, I knew something had changed forever. But for you to understand how I got to where I am, for you to understand why those words came out of my mouth after 1.5 years of silence, I need to tell you my story from the beginning. I need you to know the woman I was before I became invisible. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt used by those you love most, subscribe to this channel, because what follows is the truth that many keep quiet out of fear, but I am no longer afraid. My name is Eleanor, and this is my confession. Before becoming Ethan's grandmother or Drew's mother, I was Eleanor Hayes, a complete woman, a person with her own story. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, 67 years ago, in an old house with a courtyard, where my mother grew red geraniums and mint. I was the eldest of 4 siblings. I learned to read at age 4 because my father, a postal worker, brought in used books that people had left behind. While my siblings played in the street, I devoured stories, sitting under the old oak tree. At 23, I graduated as an elementary school teacher. It was the proudest day of my life. My mother cried when she saw me with the certificate in my hands. My mother told me, "Now no one will take away what you know." And she was right. I taught for 42 years. 42 years raising children, wiping noses, drying tears, teaching those who couldn't read to dream, and those who had forgotten how to read. I retired 6 years ago with a modest but decent pension, $8,200 a month, which I managed carefully. At 25, I met Robert at a book fair in Charleston. He sold encyclopedias door to door. He wasn't handsome by magazine standards, but he had a smile that lit up entire rooms and a way of speaking that made you feel important. I fell in love with his voice before his face. We were married months later in a small ceremony at the parish of St. Michael. My dress was borrowed, but my happiness was completely mine. Robert didn't have much, but he gave me something that money can't buy: respect. He never raised his voice, never made me feel small. When I decided to keep working after Drew was born, he was the one who carried the baby at night so I could rest before the morning shift. "You work too, Ellie," he would tell me. "This is for both of us." Drew was born when I was 28, a boy with big eyes and restless hands who filled our house with laughter and disorder. We raised him firmly, but tenderly. We taught him that work gives dignity, that family is sacred, that a word is worth more than any signature. Or so I thought. The years passed as they always do, slowly when you're young, quickly when you realize that life is passing by. Drew grew up. He studied civil engineering. He got a good job at a construction company in Atlanta, Georgia. Robert and I moved with him when he settled there, leaving Charleston behind, but carrying our roots in our hearts. We bought a small house in the Decatur neighborhood with our life savings. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a living room with large windows that let in the afternoon sun. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. Every piece of furniture had a story. Every stain on the wall was a memory. Robert retired at 63. We thought about traveling. We wanted to get to know Santa Fe, walk through its markets, try its local chili, sit in a cafe and watch life pass by slowly. We bought guidebooks, marked places on the map. But life has its own plans. At 65, Robert started coughing. At first, we thought it was a persistent flu. Then came the studies, the x-rays, the words no doctor wants to pronounce. Advanced lung cancer. 18 months later, I buried him in the garden cemetery, under a gray sky that wouldn't stop crying. I was left alone at 63, in that house that suddenly felt too big and too empty at the same time. The first few months were a dark tunnel. I got up because my body asked for it, not because I felt like it. I cooked for one person and ended up throwing away half the food because I forgot that Robert wouldn't be home for dinner. Drew came over on Sundays, sat in the armchair where his father used to read the newspaper, and asked me if I was okay. I said yes, because it was easier than explaining the weight of silence. But I was lying. I wasn't okay. I was broken. It was Brenda who saved me. Brenda, my friend since elementary school. That woman with a boisterous laugh and straightforward advice, who showed up one Tuesday with a pound cake and a demand. Eleanor Hayes, you're going to rot if you stay locked up. Tomorrow you're coming to the reading group, and I won't accept a no. And I went. That group of 6 women who met every Thursday at the public library became my lifeline. We read Toni Morrison, Amy Tan, and Isabel Allende. We argued, laughed, drank weak coffee in disposable cups, and for 2 hours a week, I played Eleanor again, not just Robert's widow. I resumed my yoga classes, which I had abandoned during my husband's illness. I enrolled in an embroidery workshop. I started walking in the park in the mornings, greeting the same coffee vendors, petting the same stray dogs. Slowly, very slowly, I began to breathe again. I had a routine. I had friends. I had small projects, but they were all mine. Finishing Faulkner's complete library, learning how to make pecan pie for Thanksgiving, painting my bedroom wall yellow because I had always liked that color, but Robert preferred white. I had modest savings, $340,000 in the bank, the proceeds of Robert's liquidation, and some I had saved from my retirement. It wasn't a fortune, but it was my security, my cushion for emergencies, my freedom to not depend on anyone. I had a life. And then Drew met Jessica. It was at a sustainable construction conference, he told me. She worked in public relations for a materials company. She was pretty. I noticed that from the first photo she showed me. Long, dark hair, almond-shaped eyes, a perfect smile that showed off white teeth. She's special, Mom, Drew told me with that light in his eyes. That only premature love ignites. Very special. I met her 3 months later at a family dinner I hosted at my house. I prepared chili, cornbread, collard greens, and sweet tea. I set the table with the embroidered tablecloth my mother had given me for my wedding. Jess arrived wearing stiletto heels and a dress that cost more than my 2-month supply of groceries. She kissed my cheek, leaving a pink lipstick mark. She looked at my house with those eyes that evaluate and judge everything. "How cozy, Mrs. Hayes," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. What a big house for just one person. There was the first seed, but I didn't see it, or didn't want to see it. During dinner, she spoke little about herself and a lot about appearances, about restaurants I didn't know, about brands I couldn't afford, about trips I would never take. Drew looked at her enraptured. I looked at her anxiously, but I kept quiet because a mother doesn't destroy her child's dreams. Because I thought maybe I was being unfair, projecting my insecurities onto a girl who only wanted to impress. I was wrong. 3 months later, they announced they were getting married, and that was the beginning of my descent into a place I didn't know if I could ever escape. The wedding was in an event hall in Buckhead, a place with crystal chandeliers and 5-course champagne-colored tablecloths that cost more per person than I spent on food in a month. Jess wore an imported dress that, I heard, cost $85,000. I was wearing a navy blue tailored suit that I had bought at a discount in Macy's. I felt out of place from the moment I walked through the door. Jess's parents owned a pharmacy chain in Austin, Texas. They were wealthy people, the kind who smile with their lips but fear with their eyes. Her mother greeted me with 2 air kisses and a phrase that still burns inside me. "Oh, how beautiful you look, ma'am." You can tell she made an effort. I made an effort, as if dressing for my only son's wedding was an act of heroic will and not something natural. I cried during the ceremony. Drew looked so handsome in his gray Oxford suit, so happy as he said his vows. For a moment, I forgot my worries and only saw my little boy, grown into a man, swearing eternal love in front of an altar full of white roses. But at the reception, while the guests were dancing and I sat alone at a table because I didn't know anyone, I saw something that chilled my blood. Jess was talking to her mother in a corner. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read her gestures. Jess surreptitiously pointed to where I was standing. Her mother nodded, and then they both laughed. A brief, knowing laugh. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe they weren't talking about me, but something in my stomach churned. The following months were of adjustment. Drew and Jess moved into an apartment in Midtown, a modern place with huge windows and minimalist furniture that looked like something out of a magazine. I visited them every 2 weeks, always on Sundays, always bringing something. A lemon pie, tamales I bought at the market, some stew that she knew Drew liked. Jess received my dishes with a polite smile. Oh, mother-in-law, she wouldn't have been bothered. But I noticed how I kept them in the refrigerator, and weeks later when I returned, the containers were still there untouched, the contents already spoiled. He never ate what I cooked. 6 months after the wedding, Drew called me with news that made my heart explode with happiness. "Mom, are you going to be a grandmother?" I cried with joy. A grandson, a little piece of Drew, a little piece of Robert that would live again in those new eyes. I imagined afternoons in the park, bedtime stories, teaching him to read as I had taught hundreds of children. I imagined being the grandmother I'd had, present, loving, that figure who smells of cinnamon and is always available for a hug. I never imagined that availability would become a demand. Jess's pregnancy was theatrical. Every discomfort was a drama worthy of a soap opera. Every craving was an emergency that Drew resolved by leaving his work half-finished. She posted photos of her baby bump on social media with phrases like, "growing a life and blessed," always perfectly made up, always with the perfect lighting. I offered to help. "When the baby is born, count on me," I told her one afternoon while we were drinking tea in her living room. "I'm here for you." Her eyes sparkled, but what I saw wasn't tenderness, it was calculation. "Oh, mother-in-law, how beautiful you are," she replied, caressing her belly. "The truth is, we're going to need a lot of support. I work from home, but it's still hard, you know? And daycare centers are incredibly expensive, and I don't trust leaving my baby with just anyone." That was the trap, and I, naive, stuck my head right into it. "I can take care of him," I said without a second thought. "I'm his grandmother." "I'll be delighted," Jess smiled. Drew smiled, and I, silly me, smiled too. I didn't know I had just signed a contract with no fine print, no schedules, no days off, a contract where I would be the labor force and they the sole beneficiaries. Ethan was born on a Tuesday in March at 6 p.m. He weighed 7 pounds. He had Drew's eyes and a shock of black hair that looked like freshly cut grass. When they placed him in my arms for the first time in the hospital, I felt my heart expand to fill the room. "Hello, my love," I whispered. "I'm your Grandma Ellie, and I'll love you all my life." I kept that promise, but I paid a price that no one warned me about. The first few weeks were normal. I visited, held the baby, helped with whatever I could, but then came the first request. "Mother-in-law," Jess told me on the phone in a tired but firm voice, "I could come early tomorrow, around 9 a.m. I need to get some sleep. Ethan doesn't let me rest." I arrived at 9. I stayed until 3 in the afternoon. Jess slept. I changed diapers, warmed bottles, rocked, and cleaned. When I left, she didn't even offer me a glass of water. Next week, she can come at 8. The next, better at 7:30 before he wakes up. And so, little by little, without me realizing it, my life ceased to belong to me. A month after Ethan was born, Jess invited me to her apartment. She had that smile I was beginning to recognize, the smile of someone who is about to ask for something big, disguising it as a small favor. "Mother-in-law, I need to talk to you," she began, while pouring coffee for herself. "Drew and I have been thinking. I work from home with my clients and, well, I can't take calls with a crying baby, and daycare, you see, is like $9,000 a month and it's not enough. Right now we're paying for the apartment, the car." He paused carefully. "Do you think you could take care of Ethan Monday through Friday alone while we work?" My first reaction was genuine joy, taking care of my grandson every day, watching him grow, being a fundamental part of his life. What grandmother wouldn't want that? "Of course," I answered without hesitation. "With pleasure, darling." "Oh, mother-in-law, you're an angel," he said, embracing me with a hug that lasted exactly 2 seconds. So we agreed that Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. That way, I can work peacefully. 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. 11 hours, 5 days, 55 hours a week. I did the math later when it was already late. But at that moment I only thought about my grandson. I didn't ask how long the meantime would be. I didn't set limits. I didn't set conditions. And they didn't offer anything. Not a, "Do you think it's okay, Mom?" Nor a, "Can you?" or "Is it too much?" Nor even a, "Thank you," that sounded real. They just assumed that I would be available, that my time wasn't worth it, that my life could be put on hold so theirs could continue uninterrupted. And I allowed them to assume it, because he was my grandson, because he was my son, because good grandmothers make sacrifices, or so I had been taught all my life. But I was about to learn a much bitter lesson, that sacrifice without reciprocation isn't love. It's slavery by another name. The first Monday I arrived at 7 a.m. I rang the doorbell twice. No one answered. I dialed Drew's cell phone and he answered in a slurred voice, still asleep. "Mom, use the key we gave you." They hadn't given me a key. I waited 15 minutes standing in the hallway until Jess opened the door in her bathrobe, her hair disheveled and her face annoyed. She didn't say good morning. She just stepped aside to let me in. Ethan was crying in his crib. The apartment smelled of sour milk and a dirty diaper. There were dishes piled up in the sink from the night before. "There it is." Jess pointed toward the baby's room while yawning. "He's hungry. His milk is in the fridge. You know how to heat it up, right?" And without waiting for an answer, she went into her bedroom and closed the door. I took a deep breath. I picked up Ethan, whose diaper was so full it had dripped down to his legs. I cleaned him, changed him, sang to him softly while I prepared his bottle. His little hands clung to my finger, and something inside me melted. "Yeah, honey," I whispered. "Here's your grandma. It's over." But nothing had happened. It was just beginning. That first week set the pattern that would repeat itself for months. I would arrive at 7. Jess was still asleep. Drew had already left for work. Ethan needed a change, food, a bath, attention. I did it all. Jess would leave her room around 10, already showered, wearing makeup, expensive workout clothes, and a green smoothie in her hand. She would sit on the couch with her laptop, headphones in, working. I never saw her take a video call. I never heard an important meeting. Most of the time she was on social media, posting photos with motivational quotes. An entrepreneurial mom, balancing life and business, blessed with my family. While she rocked her phone, I rocked her son in my arms for hours. Because Ethan had colic and was only calmed by constant movement. The weeks turned into months, and the boundaries were erased like sand under the tide. Mother-in-law, can you stay until 7 today? I have an appointment at the salon. Eleanor, I'll be here at 6:30 tomorrow. I need to exercise early. Can you bring diapers? We forgot to buy some, and right now I can't go out. Every request was a demand disguised as a question, and I always said yes. I canceled my Tuesday yoga class because Jess had a dentist's appointment that day. I stopped going to the Thursday reading group because Ethan was restless and needed routine. My friends stopped inviting me for coffee because I always answered the same thing. I can't. I have the baby. My life became a simple equation. Wake up, shower, have a quick breakfast, arrive on time, take care of 11 hours, come home exhausted, have some dinner, sleep, repeat. Weekends were supposed to be mine, but then the messages came. Mother-in-law, sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but we have a wedding and the babysitter canceled. Can you make it with Ethan? Oh, Eleanor, excuse us, but a last-minute commitment came up. Would you do us a favor? It was never a question. It was always a statement with a question mark. And I always responded, yes, of course, because he was my grandson, because I didn't want them to think I was a disinterested grandmother, because I still believed this was temporary, that at any moment Jess would say, Mother-in-law, I can do it on my own now. Thank you for everything. But that day never came. What did come were the demands disguised as suggestions. Eleanor, don't you think Ethan should start him with solid foods? There's a method I read. Mother-in-law, I saw on the internet that babies should nap exactly 90 minutes long. Can you confirm that? Oh, you don't have a less striking blouse. It's really noticeable in the photos with Ethan. Criticisms wrapped in maternal concern. Orders disguised as advice. And meanwhile, my house was gathering dust. My refrigerator was almost empty because I didn't have time to go to the market. My friends stopped calling. Brenda sent me messages that I responded to with monosyllables because I was too tired to hold a real conversation. I became a shadow of myself. But the worst part wasn't the physical exhaustion, it was the invisibility. Jess never asked me how I was, never said a genuine thank you. When she came home from her meetings that smelled of expensive perfume and coffee shop coffee, she would take Ethan from my arms without looking me in the eye. How was he? She would ask while checking her phone. Fine. He ate everything. He took his nap. Well, see you tomorrow. That was it. My daily goodbye. See you tomorrow. Without warmth, without recognition, without humanity. Drew wasn't any better. The few times we talked, he evaded me. Mom, thank you for helping us. I don't know what we would do without you. But that thank you sounded empty and was never accompanied by, are you okay? Or, it's not too much for you. One afternoon, after 6 months of this routine, I dared to say something. Son, I'm a little tired. Do you think we could cut back 1 day? Maybe just 4 days a week. His face tensed immediately. Mom, right now, just when things are complicated at work, Jess is very stressed. She needs to know she can count on you. You can't leave us like this. Leave, as if asking for a break was abandonment. I swallowed, nodded, returned to my place of silence. And so the months continued to pass. Ethan grew. I aged faster. My knees ached every morning when I climbed the stairs of his building. My back complained every night. The spots on my hands became more visible. The gray hairs multiplied. But no one noticed because, to them, I wasn't a 67-year-old with aches and pains, accumulated fatigue. It was a resource, a free and always available tool. My savings began to dwindle. I spent $80 a day on Uber rides, round trip, because my house was far from their apartment. That added up to $400 a day, $2,000 a week, and $8,000 a month just on transportation. I bought things they forgot: baby wipes, diaper rash cream, fruit for baby food. They never reimbursed me. "Oh, mother-in-law, I'll deposit your money later," Jess would say. That deposit never arrived. I calculated one night, sitting in my kitchen with an old notebook. If professional childcare cost between $8,000 and $10,000 a week, and I gave 55 hours of work, I was giving away around $36,000 a month of my time. In 1 year, $432,000, more than I had saved in the bank. My stomach hurt, my chest hurt, my soul hurt, but I didn't say anything because saying anything would be selfish, right? Grandmothers don't charge, grandmothers give, grandmothers sacrifice. That's what I had been taught, until one day my body said, "Enough," before my mouth. It was a Wednesday in October. I woke up with my throat burning and my body heavy, as if I were carrying stones tied to my bones. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, eyes glazed, cheeks flushed, dry lips. I looked for the thermometer in the medicine cabinet. 101.3 degrees, fever. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my pajamas, and looked at the clock. 6:15 in the morning. I had to leave the house in 15 minutes to get to Jess's apartment on time. For the first time in a year and a half, I dialed Drew's phone early. He answered on the 4th ring. "Mom, what happened?" His voice sounded worried. For a second, I felt relief. "Son, I feel really bad. I have a fever. My whole body hurts. I don't think I can go today." I heard a sigh on the other end, not one of empathy, but of annoyance. "Mom, really? I have a very important meeting today that I can't cancel, and Jess has an appointment with her nutritionist at 9 o'clock. Drew, my temperature is almost 102. Wait." The line fell silent. I heard muffled voices in the background. Then another voice picked up the phone. "Jess? Eleanor?" Her tone was icy, wrapped in false sweetness. "I understand you're feeling bad, but what are we going to do? We can't miss our commitments. Besides, you've been sick with Ethan so many times that it's just another flu." I felt something get stuck in my throat. It wasn't phlegm. "Jess, I really feel really bad. Look, make an effort. Ethan is still asleep. He'll have some tea, curl up on the couch, and that's it. We're early, I promise." Yes, it wasn't a question, it was an order. She hung up before I could answer. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling the tears mixing with the sweat from my fever. Something inside me screamed at me to say no, to stay in bed, to set boundaries. But that something was buried beneath layers and layers of guilt and obligation. I got up, trembling, and dressed as best I could. Every movement was a new pain. I took 2 Tylenol with warm water. I left my house while the world was still dark. The Uber ride was torture. Every pothole was a stab wound. The driver asked if I was okay. I said yes because it was easier than explaining that I was taking care of a baby while my body was screaming for a bed. I arrived at 7:05. I rang the doorbell. Drew opened the door wearing his suit, tie half tied, cell phone to his ear. He beckoned me with his hand and continued talking as he walked away toward his bedroom. He didn't even look me in the eye. Jess came out of her room wearing designer sportswear, her hair tied back in a perfect ponytail, wireless headphones in her ears. She took her bag from the coat rack. "Thanks for coming, mother-in-law." Ethan was still sleeping. His milk was ready in the fridge. Anything would get to me, and she left. The two of them left. I was left alone in that silent apartment with a sleeping baby and a fever that made the walls dance. I sat on the couch, wrapping myself in a blanket I found. I was shivering. The cold came from inside, from a place no blanket could warm. Ethan woke up half an hour later. His cries pierced my head like needles. I got up, dizzy, holding on to furniture to keep from falling. I changed him, gave him his milk, rocked him while he pulled my hair, and I felt the room spinning. At 10 in the morning, Ethan was restless. He cried non-stop for an hour. He had gas. He needed movement. I carried him. I walked with him all over the apartment. I went up and down, rocking him, singing to him in a voice I could barely sustain. My body begged for mercy. My legs trembled. My vision blurred, and then it passed. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face, leaving Ethan in his playpen crying. I turned on the faucet, poured cold water on my cheeks. The world tilted to one side, and I fell. I don't know how long I was there, on the cold bathroom floor, staring at the white ceiling while listening to my grandson crying outside. Maybe it was seconds, maybe minutes. I only know that when I managed to sit up, leaning against the tub, my whole body was shaking and tears were flowing uncontrollably. What was I doing there? Why had I come? Why hadn't anyone told me to rest, Mom? Can we make up for it one day? I crawled into the playpen. I picked up Ethan, who calmed immediately when he felt my arms. I hugged him tightly, smelling his little head, feeling his warmth against my icy chest. "Forgive me, my love," I whispered. "Your grandma isn't feeling well." He looked at me with those huge dark eyes, not understanding, and I cried with him in my arms, rocking together in that broken silence, only for our shared warmth. Jess returned at 3 p.m. She arrived with bags from clothing stores, her hair freshly combed, and an iced coffee in her hand. "How was everything?" she asked, as she placed her bags on the couch, taking out a new blouse to inspect it. "It was fine," I lied. She didn't ask me how I felt. She didn't notice my cracked voice, my puffy eyes, the way I held myself on the doorframe when I got up. "That's great. Hey, can you arrive a little earlier tomorrow, around 6:30? I have a Pilates class at 7, and the traffic is heavy." I stared at her. She was still checking her new blouse, smiling to herself. "Jess," my voice came out like a thread. "I have a fever. I came sick. I fainted in your bathroom." She looked up, more surprised by my tone than by my words. "Oh, mother-in-law, she fainted, but she's all right now, right? Look, here she is standing." It wasn't mockery, it was pure indifference, and that hurt more. "I need to rest," I said, the words spilling out on their own. "I can't tomorrow." Her expression changed. The smile evaporated. "Eleanor, you can't do this to us. We already had plans. You can't just cancel." "I'm sick." "Well, take care of yourself today and you'll be better tomorrow. Take something to eat. Sleep early." I grabbed my bag. I walked to the door on legs that were barely holding me up. "See you tomorrow." "Yes." Her voice behind me sounded more like a threat than a farewell. I didn't respond. I walked down the stairs with my hand on the railing, pausing at each step. I left the building and the fresh air hit my face. I called an Uber and waited, sitting on the sidewalk because I couldn't stand. When I got home, I dragged myself to my bed and plopped down with my clothes on. I cried myself to sleep. Asleep. I woke up at 2 a.m., drenched in sweat, with my cell phone vibrating on the nightstand. A message from Jess. Mother-in-law, don't forget to be home early. Thank you. Not a single, how are you feeling, or I hope you rest. Just a reminder of my duty. I stared at the dark ceiling of my room, and something inside me, something that had been dormant for 18 months, began to awaken. It wasn't anger yet. It was a question whispering from somewhere deep inside. How long? The next day, I didn't go. I turned off my cell phone and slept for 16 hours straight. When I turned it on, I had 32 missed calls and 15 messages. None of them asked about my health. They all asked when I would be back. And there, in that difference, was the whole truth I had been denying. I was in bed for 4 days. 4 days during which my fever went down, but my heart felt sicker than ever. Drew came on the 3rd day, not to check on me. He came because he needed me to come back. He sat down on the couch in my living room, the same one where his father used to read the Sunday newspaper, and looked at me with that mixture of concern and impatience I knew all too well. Mom, are you feeling better now? A little, I replied. My voice was still raspy. That's good, because Jess is desperate. She's had to cancel everything. We're paying a neighbor $500 a day to watch Ethan for a few hours, and she's not even doing it right. The baby cries all the time. $500 a day. I added it up mentally. I was giving 11 hours for free. Drew. My voice came out firmer than I expected. Have you ever wondered how I'm feeling? He fell silent, uncomfortable. Of course I have. Mom, that's why I came. You came because you need me. It's not the same. His eyes avoided mine. He looked at his watch. He was always in a hurry. Mom, don't start. You know we appreciate you, but we also need to know if we can count on you or not. Jess and I have responsibilities, and I don't. The words came out like whiplash. I don't have a life. I don't have the right to get sick. It's not that. It's just that, well, you're already retired. We work. It's different. Retired, as if that meant disposable, available, worthless. He left 20 minutes later with a vague promise to talk later, and the certainty that they were expecting me at 7 a.m. on Monday. That afternoon my phone rang. Brenda, I hadn't answered in weeks. I had 17 unanswered messages from her. Are you okay? We miss you at the group. Are we having dinner this week? Everyone ignored. Eleanor Hayes, her voice cut through the phone with that authority that only a friend of 50 years can have. If you don't answer me right now, I'll show up at your house, and you know I'm doing it. I knew it. I'm here, Bren. Good thing, because I was already going to get my keys. What's going on with you? You've become a ghost. And there, sitting in my empty kitchen, with the afternoon falling through the window, I told her everything. Everything I'd been keeping as if it were a shameful secret. The schedules, the tiredness, the fever, the fainting, the reproachful calls when I didn't go. Brenda didn't interrupt. She just listened with that silence that weighs more than 1,000 words. When I finished, her response was a single sentence. Tomorrow, I'm going there, and we'll talk seriously. She arrived the next day at 11 o'clock in the morning, with a bag of sweet rolls and 2 coffees from her favorite cafe. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I had shared thousands of breakfasts, and looked at me with those eyes that knew every piece of my story. Eleanor began, breaking a chocolate roll. I'm going to tell you something, and it's going to hurt, but I love you too much to keep quiet. I nodded, holding the hot coffee in my hands. You've become her employee. Worse than that, her slave. Bren, don't exaggerate. He's my grandson. That's right, your grandson. Not your son, not your responsibility. Complete ability. And even if it were, even if you were raising Ethan because Drew couldn't, you would still have the right to set limits. Her words were like stones falling into a still lake. Each one created ripples that I didn't want to see. It's temporary, I murmured. When Ethan is older. Eleanor is 1.5 years old. How many years are you going to wait until he starts kindergarten, elementary school, until you can't even walk anymore? I stayed silent because I knew she was right. Do they pay you? She asked suddenly. The question fell on me like a bucket of ice water. Pay me, Bren. He's my grandson. Grandmothers don't get paid. Grandmothers visit. Grandmothers bring gifts. Grandmothers babysit for a while when the parents need to go out. Grandmothers don't work 55 hours a week for free while the parents get their nails done and go to the gym. Her voice wasn't cruel. It was clear, brutally clear. Do you know how much a professional nanny costs, Eleanor? I shook my head, even though I'd already done the math myself. Between $8,000 and $10,000 a week. For the hours you give, you'd be earning about $40,000 a month. In 1.5 years, you've given away more than $700,000 of your time. The number hit me in the chest. $700,000. And not only that, Brenda continued, taking out her cell phone. The other day I saw Jess's Instagram. Look, she showed me the screen. Photo after photo of Jess in expensive restaurants in designer clothes, at the gym, at the spa. A recent post read, Investing in myself, today, session with my personal trainer. See that? Brenda pointed at the description. She pays $12,000 a month to a personal trainer. $12,000 to do squats. I felt nauseous. Jess has money for the gym, for the salon, for clothes that cost as much as you spend on food each month. But she doesn't have enough to pay you a single dollar, not even the Uber rides. Do you know why? I looked at her, waiting for the answer I already knew. Because you've never asked for it. Because you've agreed to be free. The words settled in my stomach like stones. I don't want them to think I do things for money. And what's so bad about that? Brenda's voice rose a little. Your time is worth it. Your work is worth it. Your energy, your health, your aching knees, your cracking back. All of that is worth it. Or do you think it isn't? I didn't answer because I didn't know how to respond. Eleanor, listen to me carefully. You raised Drew, worked 40 years as a teacher, retired, became a widow, survived. You're 67 years old and you deserve to be enjoying this stage. Reading, traveling, living. And what are you doing? Living the life they don't want to live. I swallowed. The tears were starting to sting. While Jess boasts on social media that she's a present mother, you're the one who changes the diapers. While she goes to the gym, you carry a 25-pound child with shattered knees. While Drew works, don't worry, you sacrifice your peace. But it's my obligation as a grandmother, right? Brenda slammed her open palm on the table. The noise startled me. Your obligation was to raise your son, and you did it well. You raised him, you fed him, you gave him a home. You've done your duty. Now the obligation is his, to be a father, to raise his son, to find solutions. Not to exploit his mother. Exploiting, that word. What they're doing to you has a name, Eleanor. It's called abuse. Emotional abuse. economic abuse, taking advantage of your love to avoid assuming their responsibilities. I wanted to defend them. I wanted to say it wasn't that serious, but the words wouldn't come out, because deep down I knew Brenda was telling the truth that I had buried under layers of justifications. "When was the last time you went to the movies?" she asked suddenly. I blinked, not remembering. "When was the last time you bought something for yourself? A book, a blouse, anything?" Silence. "When was the last time you slept in, a leisurely breakfast, that you called someone just to talk?" Every question was a soft slap in the face. "You have no life, Eleanor. And the worst part is that they don't even notice, because to them, you're not a whole person, you're a resource." Something broke there. The tears began to fall uncontrollably. Brenda stood up, came around the table, and hugged me. A strong hug, the kind that holds you when you're about to break. "Forgive me for being harsh," she whispered in my ear, "but someone had to tell you." I cried on her shoulder like I hadn't cried since I buried Robert. I cried for all the lost time, for all the times I felt invisible, for every morning I woke up feeling unwilling, but still got up, for every night I arrived broken and no one asked how I was. When I finally let go, Brenda wiped my tears with a napkin. "Now," she said with that firmness that characterized her, "what are you going to do?" I looked out the window. The sun was falling on the buildings, painting everything gold. "I don't know," I whispered. "Well, you have to decide, because this isn't life, and you're dying in silence." That night, I couldn't sleep. Brenda's words spinning in my head like an unstoppable carousel. $700,000 given away, $12,000 for the personal trainer. She's already retired. It's temporary. She can't leave us like this. I got up at 3 in the morning and sat in the dark living room, feeling the weight of 18 months of accumulated silence. And there, in that darkness, I made a decision. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but something had to change because Brenda was right. This wasn't love, it was a slow extinction, and I wasn't going to let myself disappear. The following Monday, I returned, not because I wanted to, but because I still didn't know how to say no. I arrived at 7:10, as always. I rang the doorbell. Jess opened the door in ivory silk pajamas, the ones I'd seen in photos on Instagram with the price tag still visible on the tag. $320. She smelled of expensive moisturizer. Her hair fell perfectly over her shoulders. In her hand, she held a cup of freshly brewed coffee, steaming, aromatic. She didn't offer it to me. "Good morning," I said. My voice sounded tired, even to me. "Hello, Eleanor," she replied, without looking me in the eyes, stepping aside to let me in. Not even a full good morning, just my name, pronounced like someone naming an object. I walked in. The apartment was silent. Ethan was still asleep. Drew had already left. The living room was immaculate, as always. No trace of the hours I spent there every day, keeping everything in order while they lived their lives. I took off my sweater and hung it on the coat rack by the door. My hands were trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from something deeper that still hadn't been named. Jess walked toward the kitchen, her fuzzy slippers scuffling along the wooden floor. She sipped her coffee with the calmness of someone who has all the time in the world. She leaned on the counter, checking her cell phone with her right thumb, scrolling through a screen that lit up her face. I stood in the living room, waiting, as I always waited. "Ethan ate well last night," she said without looking up, "but I think his molars are coming out. He was a little whiny." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "His milk is in the fridge, ready. Just heat it for 30 seconds. It's fine." Silence fell between us, an awkward, heavy silence, filled with all the words I never said. Then she spoke, and with those words, everything changed. "Listen, Eleanor." Her tone was casual, like someone asking you to pass the salt at the table. "I'll be back earlier tomorrow, around 6:30. "Yes." I sat still, looking at her. "Last night I stayed up watching a series and I'm exhausted. I want to sleep a little more." Something inside me stopped, like when you turn off an engine that had been running for months. A click and silence. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw her expensive pajamas that cost more than my pantry. I saw her artisanal coffee that she drank without sharing. I saw her perfectly manicured nails, that pale pink she got every 2 weeks at a salon where I would never set foot because a manicure cost as much as I spent on a week's food. I saw her relaxed posture, her complete nonchalance, the way she spoke to me as if I were part of the furniture. And then I saw something else. I saw myself, Eleanor, 67 years old, knees that creaked every morning, a back that couldn't remember the last time it didn't hurt, hands stained by time, eyes tired of crying in silence. I saw the woman I had been, a respected teacher, a beloved wife, a present mother, a complete person. And I saw the woman I had become, invisible, used, gratuitous, disposable. I saw all of that in a second, in that second between her request and my answer. And something inside me, something that had been dormant, buried under layers of guilt and obligation, simply woke up. "If you want to sleep more," I said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Calm as water before a storm. "Hire a nanny." Jess looked up from her phone. Her eyebrows raised slightly. A smile of disbelief began to form on her lips. "What? Do you want to sleep more?" I repeated this time, looking her straight in the eyes. "Hire a babysitter because I'm going away." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the kitchen clock, tick, tick, tick. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the world, my world, changing shape with every passing second. Jess blinked once, twice, as if she couldn't process what she had just heard. Then that smile appeared, that condescending smile I'd seen so many times. The smile of someone who's used to people kowtowing to her. "Travel," she said, drawling the word, savoring it as if it were a joke. "At your age, Eleanor, don't be ridiculous." There was that word that had haunted me my whole life. Ridiculous. Ridiculous for wanting more. Ridiculous for dreaming. Ridiculous for thinking my life still belonged to me. But this time, that word didn't bend me. It straightened me. Ridiculous was me, I told her as I took a step toward my sweater in the coat rack, taking care of you for free while you did your nails with my time. I saw how her face changed. The smile froze, twisted, disappeared. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." I took my sweater and put it on calmly, buttoning it one by one, taking my time. Each button was an act of liberation. "You heard me perfectly, Jess." Her voice rose, losing that false softness. "What's wrong with you? Why are you talking to me like that?" "Because I'm tired," I answered, simply, honestly. "I'm tired of arriving at 7 in the morning. I'm tired of you never even offering me a coffee. I'm tired of you coming early as if my time was worthless. I'm tired of seeing your photos at the gym while I carry your son with my shattered knees. You're his grandmother." She spat the words out as if they were argument enough. Exactly. His grandmother. Not his mother. Not his nanny. His grandmother. You can't just leave us just like that. It's not out of nowhere, I interrupted her, my voice still firm, each word placed with precision. This is after 18 months of arriving on time, of canceling my life, of fainting in your bathroom with a fever while you went to the salon. It's not out of nowhere, it's after enough. Her hands tightened around the coffee cup. I saw they were shaking slightly. Drew is going to know about this. Perfect. Tell him his mother finally got tired of being invisible. I slung my bag over my shoulder, that old bag that had belonged to my mother with the handles worn but still firm. I held on to it like someone holding on a lifeline. This is incredible. Her voice was now shrill, losing control. After everything we've done for you, I stopped. I turned around. Everything they've done for me, I repeated slowly. Tell me, Jess, what exactly have they done for me? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. We let you see your grandson every day. And there was her naked truth. They let me see him, as if seeing my grandson was a privilege they granted, not a relationship I was entitled to, as if my 55 hours a week were a favor they were doing me. I smiled, not out of joy, but out of recognition. Thank you for your honesty, I said. At least, now I know exactly how you see me. I walked toward the door. Each step was firmer than the last. Eleanor, wait! Her voice changed, trying to soften it, but it was too late. That's not what I meant to say. It's just that I'm stressed. I didn't think. I put my hand on the doorknob. I didn't think either, I admitted. I didn't think about how much I'm worth. I didn't think about deserving respect. I didn't think about the fact that my life also matters. But I've thought, and this is over. You can't leave like this. And Ethan has parents, 2 of them, who can and should take care of him, or find solutions that don't include exploiting me. I opened the door. The hallway air came in, fresh, clean. Drew is going to be furious, he threatened. Let him be, I replied without turning around. All my life I've been afraid that my son would be angry with me. But you know what I'm most afraid of now? Reaching 70 and regretting having let myself be erased. And I left. I closed the door behind me with a soft click that sounded like thunder. I walked down the hallway, down the stairs, out of the building, and then, standing on the sidewalk, the morning sun beating down on my face, I broke down. I cried right there in the street, not caring who saw me. I cried with my whole body shaking, with tears welling up from somewhere deep inside that had been sealed off for too long. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, because I had just done something I never thought I would do. I had just chosen myself. I walked to the corner, my legs shaking, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. I sat down on a bench at a bus stop, even though I wasn't going to take one. I needed air. I needed to process what I had just done. I had said no. After 18 months of always saying yes, I had said no. I took out my phone, my hands still shaking. I had 3 missed calls from Jess. I ignored the notification. I blocked her number. The button flashed red for a second before disappearing. Then I blocked Drew's, my son. I blocked my own son. The weight of that decision fell upon me like a stone, but I didn't back down. If I didn't put up that barrier now, if I didn't give myself room to breathe without being bombarded with demands and manipulations, I'd fall again, and this time I wouldn't get up. I called Brenda. She answered on the second ring. Eleanor, what happened? Are you okay? I did it. My voice came out between laughter and tears. "Bren, I did it. I told them, no." Silence on the other end. Then a cry of victory that made me pull the phone away from my ear. "That's how it's done. That's my Eleanor. Tell me everything. What exactly did you say?" I told her word for word about the request to arrive earlier, my response, Jess's face, her disbelief, her contempt, my departure. Brenda listened without interrupting, and when I finished, her voice sounded proud and firm. "And now what's next?" I looked at the sky. It was a Tuesday in October, and the air smelled of rain. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't have a plan. I just knew I had to get out of there." "Well, now you really need a plan because they're going to come for you. They're going to try to make you feel guilty, to manipulate you, to convince you that you're a bad mother, a bad grandmother, and that you need to be prepared." She was right. "Come to my house," Brenda ordered. "Now let's talk about this with a cool head." An hour later, I was sitting in Brenda's kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea in my hands and a plate of oatmeal cookies that she had taken from who knows where. "First things first," Brenda said, taking out a notebook and a pen. "How much money have you saved?" $340,000 in the bank." "Any debts?" "No, the house is already paid off. I don't owe anything." "Perfect. Your pension?" $8,200 a month. Brenda wrote the numbers, calculating. "So you're fine financially. You don't need their money because they've never given you any. What you need is to get your life back." I nodded. "What have you missed most in these months?" The question took me by surprise. I had to think. "Reading," I finally said. "I have 3 books on my nightstand that I bought a year ago, and I haven't gotten past the first page. I miss the reading group. I miss my morning walks. I miss feeling like myself." Brenda wrote each thing down. "So that's what you're going to get back, one by one. But first you need to go. Go, where? Anywhere, far away, for a while. Give them space to feel your absence. And give yourself space to remember who you are without them breathing down your neck." The idea terrified me and excited me at the same time. I can't just go on a trip. Why not? You have money. You have time. You have no real obligations, Eleanor, only the ones you've imposed on yourself. She got up and went to her study. He came back with an old laptop. "Remember how you always talked about Santa Fe? You and Robert wanted to go." My chest tightened. Robert. We had dreamed of walking through the markets of Santa Fe, tasting its local chili, seeing the ruins of the cliff dwellings. We had a guidebook marked with places we wanted to visit. "It's not the same without him," I whispered. "Exactly. It's not the same, but that doesn't mean you can't go. It means you'll go differently. Like Eleanor alone, discovering what she likes, what makes her happy." She opened her laptop and looked up flights. "Look, Atlanta to Santa Fe. A flight leaves on Friday at 10 in the morning, $180. Return in 10 days, another $180. And here's a small hotel downtown with breakfast included, $200 a night. Total $2,000 for the hotel plus $360 for flights." She added up $2,360 for 10 days plus about $500 for meals, outings, souvenirs. Let's say $3,000 total. Can you afford it? Yes. But no buts. You're going. Go, and you're going this Friday in 3 days. That gives them time to assimilate that you meant it, and gives you time to mentally prepare. My head was spinning. All alone in Santa Fe. I had barely left Atlanta in the last 4 years. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Of course you're scared. But fear is no reason to stay trapped. Fear is the sign that you're doing something important. That afternoon, Brenda helped me book everything: flight, hotel. She even made a list of places I had to visit: the farmer's market, the cathedral, the cliff dwellings, the canyon road galleries. And no answering calls all day, she warned. You only bring your cell phone for real emergencies. If Drew wants to talk to you, let him send you a message, and you decide when and if you respond. When I got home that evening, I felt different, lighter, as if I had taken off a heavy coat I didn't know I was wearing. I sat in my living room and looked around. My house, my space. I hadn't really seen it in weeks. It was full of dust. The plants on the balcony were dry, the refrigerator almost empty. There was unopened mail stacked on the dining room table. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted my house to feel like home again. I watered the plants, washed the dishes, opened the windows to let in fresh air. I put on some music, something I hadn't done in months. Patsy Cline was singing Crazy, and I sang along with her while I dusted the furniture. I felt alive. At 8 p.m., I turned on my cell phone. There were 43 missed calls, 27 from Drew, 16 from unknown numbers. They were probably Jess using other phones. There were messages, lots of messages. I read them all. It was like seeing the stages of grief in real time. The first ones were disbelief. Mom, what happened? Jess told me something weird. Call me. Then came the angry ones. Mom, this is so immature. You stood us up. I had to miss work. Do you realize what you caused? Then the manipulative ones. Ethan misses you. He cried all day. Are you really going to do this to your grandson? And finally, the threatening ones. If you don't answer, I'm going to your house. We need to talk. I took a deep breath and wrote a single message, which I sent to Drew. Son, I'm fine. I'm not answering calls for now. I need time for myself. See you when I get back from my trip. I love you. I turned off my cell phone before seeing his reply. The next 2 days were strange. I woke up early out of habit, but instead of rushing out, I stayed in bed. I read, ate a slow breakfast, and went for walks in the park. On Wednesday, I went to the bank and withdrew $3,500 in cash. On Thursday, I went to buy a new suitcase, a small navy blue one. I packed light clothes, comfortable shoes, my favorite Flannery O'Connor book, and a new notebook to write in. Thursday night, Drew appeared at my door. I rang the bell insistently. I was eating vegetable soup that I had made calmly, enjoying every spoonful. I opened the door. He looked terrible. Puffy eyes, stubble, wrinkled shirt. Mom, his voice sounded broken. We need to talk. Come in, I said simply. He sat down in the same chair he had been in a few days ago, but now his posture was different. There was no more impatience. There was desperation. Mom, what's going on? Why did you do this? I sat down opposite him with my cup of tea in my hands. Because I'm tired, Drew. Are you tired? Mom, we're tired too. We have a son, responsibilities, and I'm 67 years old and have knees that can no longer support a 25-pound child for 11 hours a day. He remained silent. I sometimes continued in a calm but firm voice. You wondered how I was, if my back hurt, if I missed my life, if I needed rest. His eyes avoided mine. I thought you liked being with Ethan. I love being with Ethan, but I don't love being treated like a free employee. I don't love your wife talking to me as if I were her servant. I don't love disappearing so you all can live comfortably. Mom, isn't that right? Number, I interrupted. Drew, look me in the eyes and tell me, when was the last time you asked if I could help you before you assumed I would? When was the last time you offered to pay me, even my Uber rides? When was the last time you said thank you and it sounded real? He didn't respond. I became invisible, I said, and my voice broke slightly. For you, I stopped being Eleanor. I stopped being your mother. I became the one who takes care of the child, and I allowed it out of love. But the love that destroys you isn't love, son. It's senseless sacrifice. Tears streamed down her face. We didn't mean to make you feel this way. Maybe they didn't mean to, but they did. And now I need to get away. I need to remember who I am. Where are you going? To Santa Fe. 10 days alone. She stared at me as if she didn't recognize me. And what do we do? That question that summed up everything. What all parents do, Drew. They look for solutions, hire someone, get organized, take turns, assume their responsibilities. We don't have money for a babysitter. They have money for Jess to go to the gym, for the salon, for restaurants. They have money, but they never thought of using it on me because I was free. The truth fell between us like a glass wall. He stood up slowly, walked toward the door with his shoulders slumped. I don't know what to say, Mom. You don't have to say anything now. I just need you to understand that this wasn't a tantrum. It was a boundary, and it's final. He nodded without looking at me. He got out. I watched him walk to his car from my window. He sat there with his head on the steering wheel for several minutes before driving off. And I didn't feel guilty. I felt sad, yes, but I also felt something new. I felt respect for myself. That night I slept better than I had in months. And Friday morning, with my navy blue suitcase and a lighter heart, I took a taxi to the airport. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt free. Santa Fe gave me back my old self. 10 days of walking along cobblestone streets, tasting local chili in bustling markets, climbing the cliff dwellings with my knees aching, but my soul singing. I sat under the old cottonwood tree, that 2,000-year-old giant, and cried, feeling its strength. If it had survived this long, I could survive this too. I wrote in my new notebook, read in the sun, talked to strangers who became friends for an afternoon. I took photos not to show off on social media, but to remind myself that I, too, deserved beauty. I left my cell phone off. I only turned it on for an hour each night to check emergency messages. The first few days, Drew wrote things like, "Mom, I hope you're okay. Let me know when you arrive." Polite, controlled messages. But on the 4th day, the tone changed. "Mom, I need to talk to you urgently. Call me." I didn't call. On the 6th day, "Mom, please, we're desperate." On the 8th day, the message that changed everything. "Mom, I need to confess something to you. Call me when you can. It's important." I returned on a Sunday afternoon. My house smelled confined, but it felt like a sanctuary. I unpacked my suitcase slowly, packing every item carefully, like someone guarding precious memories. I turned on my cell phone. 72 messages, 31 missed calls. I took a deep breath and dialed Drew. He answered on the first ring. "Mom." His voice sounded shattered. "Thanks for calling. What happened?" Silence. A silence that lasted too long. "I can come to your house. I need to talk to you in person." "Come." He arrived 40 minutes later. He had Ethan asleep in his stroller. He looked haggard, with deep, dark circles under his eyes, and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in days. He came in and collapsed on the couch. He wasn't the confident man he had been. He was a scared little boy. "Mom," he began, his voice shaking. Jess quit her job 8 months ago. The world stopped. What? She quit 8 months ago. I had just found out 2 weeks before you left. My mind was processing information like an overloaded computer. You're telling me that all this time, while I was coming home at 7 in the morning because she was working from home, she wasn't working. She nodded without looking at me. So what was she doing? Nothing. Watching TV shows, going to the gym, hanging out with her friends. I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't know. Rage rose up my throat like lava. And the money. How did they pay for everything? With my salary and credit cards. Mom, we're in debt. $87,000 on 3 cards. I can't take it anymore. I got up and walked to the window. I needed air. When you left, Drew continued behind me. We had to hire a nanny for $950 a week. We couldn't even last 2 weeks. We don't have the money, and she got mad at me for not being able to pay. I turned to him. She got mad at you. She lied to you for 8 months. We argued horribly. I told her to go back to work. She told me she couldn't leave Ethan. I reminded her that you took care of him for free, and she said that was different, that you were the grandmother, that it was your obligation. Every word was a stab. And what did you say? She looked up. Her eyes were red. I told her she was wrong, that you had no obligation to do anything, that we had used you, that I had allowed her to treat you that way because it was easier than confronting her. Finally, my son saw the truth. I need your help, Mom. His voice cracked completely. I don't know what to do. I don't have money for a babysitter. Jess refuses to work. Ethan needs care. I ruined everything. I looked at my grandson asleep in the stroller, so small, so innocent. None of this was his fault. I looked at my broken son, finally aware of what he had allowed. And I looked inside myself at the Eleanor I had been and the Eleanor I was now. Brenda was right. They were going to come for me, to manipulate me, to make me feel guilty. But something had changed. I had changed. Drew, I said firmly, I'll help you, but not like before, under my conditions. He lifted his head, a spark of hope in his eyes. Whatever, Mom, whatever. I repeated, let's see if it's true. I sat across from Drew. Ethan was still asleep in his stroller, oblivious to the moment that was about to change our lives forever. Listen carefully, son, I began, with a voice that didn't tremble. I'm going to say this just once. I won't repeat it. I won't negotiate. Either you accept it completely, or there's no deal. Drew nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. I can take care of Ethan 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., 5 hours each day, 10 hours total per week. I watched him do the math in his head. 10 hours versus the 55 he'd been giving before. It's only 10 hours, Mom. It's the 10 hours I can give without destroying myself. I interrupted him. Do you want them or not? Yes, but there are no buts. Second condition, you're going to pay me $600 a month. It's less than a professional nanny, but it's what I need to feel that my work is worth something. Mom, we don't have any. Then get it. Jess can go back to work. You can look for overtime. You can sell that giant TV you bought or the designer clothes she never wears. It's not my problem how you resolve it. It's the price of respect. Drew remained silent. I could see the struggle on his face. Third condition, I continued. Jess is going to apologize. She's going to look me in the eyes, without justifications, without excuses, and she's going to apologize for how she treated me. If she can't do that, there's no deal. I don't know if she does, then there's no deal, I said, standing up, and they'll learn on their own. Wait, he stood up desperately. Let me talk to her, please. Give me a chance. You have 3 days, I replied, looking at the clock. It's Sunday, Wednesday at 7 p.m. I'll wait for you here, both of you. If Jess doesn't come, or if she comes but doesn't meet the third condition, forget about me as a nanny. And as a grandmother, her voice broke. As a grandmother, I'll always be there. But on my terms, you come to visit me. I decide when and for how long. No more living for your convenience. Drew picked up the stroller with trembling hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I really am. I know, son, but apologies without change are just words. He dragged his feet, carrying the weight of his new reality. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I didn't know if he would come. I didn't know if Jess would be able to swallow her pride. On Tuesday, Brenda came to get coffee. Nervously, she asked while pouring water into my coffee maker. Frustrated, I admitted, if they don't come, and if I lose my relationship with my son, then you will lose a relationship that was already broken, Eleanor. But you gained something much more valuable. You gained yourself. On Wednesday, at 7 o'clock sharp, there was a knock on my door. I opened it. There were the 3 of them. Drew with Ethan in his arms and Jess behind him, her face clean, without makeup, dressed simply. She looked different, smaller, more human. They entered in silence, sat in the living room. Ethan extended his little arms to me, and I held him, smelling his little head, feeling my heart expand. I missed you, my love, I whispered. Jess cleared her throat. Her hands were shaking in her lap. Eleanor began, and her voice sounded different. Without that arrogant certainty, I came to ask for forgiveness. I looked at her without saying anything. I behaved horribly toward you. I treated you as if you didn't matter. You sacrificed everything for us, for Ethan, and I only thought about myself. I never thanked you, never asked you how you were. I made you feel invisible. Tears streamed down her face. They weren't calculated tears. They were real. I took advantage of your love, and when you set boundaries, I thought it was you who was wrong. But it was me. It was always me. Her voice broke completely. I apologize, Eleanor. I truly do. And I understand if you can't forgive me. But I needed to tell you, looking you in the eyes, like you asked. Silence filled the room. I could hear the ticking of the watch Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary. Thank you, I finally said, for being honest. Jess nodded, wiping away her tears. The conditions I set still stand, I continued. 2 days, 5 hours, $600 a month. Are you okay with it? Yes, they answered in unison. I got a job, Jess said softly, at an advertising agency. I start on Monday. It doesn't pay much at first, but it's something, and I'm going to try hard. I nodded. Are we okay? Drew asked. We're fine, Mom. I looked at him. My son, my only son, with all his faults and weaknesses, but also with the ability to recognize his mistakes. We're learning to be okay, I replied. In a new, healthier relationship, Ethan fell asleep in my arms. The three of us looked at him in silence. "I'm going to be a good grandmother," I said softly. "The best I can be, but I'm also going to be Eleanor, a complete woman, with a life of her own. And that doesn't make me any less of a grandmother. It makes me a better person." They left half an hour later, with a clear agreement and a new beginning. Fragile, but honest. When I closed the door, Brenda knocked and they came. Jess apologized. They agreed to everything. I heard her scream of joy on the other end. "Eleanor Hayes, I'm proud of you." "Me too, Bren. I'm proud of myself." And it was true. Epilogue, the lesson, what I learned by choosing me. It's been 6 months since that Wednesday that changed everything. Today is Tuesday. It's 9 a.m. and I've just arrived at Drew and Jess's apartment. But this time it's different. Jess opens the door already dressed for work, with her briefcase in hand and a genuine smile. "Good morning, Eleanor. Come in, please. I made you coffee. It's on the table." Coffee for me, in a pretty cup, not a disposable one. "Thank you, darling." I answer, and the word comes out naturally, without forcing it. Ethan runs toward me with his little arms open, shouting, "Grandma, Grandma!" He's already walking, he's already talking, he's already a complete child. I carry him and he kisses my cheek with that sloppy, little boy kiss that's worth more than any fortune. "I have to go," Jess says, picking up her keys. "I have a meeting at 10. I'll be back around 2:30. Does that sound okay?"
Perfect. "Oh, Eleanor, the deposit is already in your account, the $600 for this month." "Thank you." She says goodbye to Ethan with a kiss, to me with a brief but real hug, and leaves, hurried but happy. I sit on the couch with my hot coffee and with Ethan playing with his cars on the rug. The house is tidy, there's respect in the air, things aren't perfect. Sometimes Jess is late and I have to stay an extra half hour. Sometimes Drew asks if I can just take care of Ethan this Friday outside of my schedule, and sometimes I say yes, but many times I say no. And I no longer feel guilty because I learned something fundamental. Saying no with love doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you a whole person. On Thursday afternoons, when I finish with Ethan, I go straight to the reading group. We reread Toni Morrison, and now we're with Maya Angelou.
We drink watery coffee in disposable cups and laugh out loud without worry. We're not bothering anyone. On Saturdays I walk through the park, stopping to pet the stray dogs. I buy coffee from the same vendor who knows me by name, Miss Ellie. The dark roast or the light blend. On Sundays, Drew, Jess, and Ethan come to eat at my house. I cook because I like to cook, not because I have to. And they bring dessert and wash the dishes. Last month I went to Austin, Texas with Brenda, exploring the city for 3 days, eating local barbecue, drinking craft beer in a bar where live music played. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. My savings got a little low, it's true. I spent on trips, on books, on an expensive blouse that I saw in a window and bought just because I liked it, without looking for a discount, without justifying myself. But my soul is richer than ever. Last night, while I was embroidering a tablecloth in my living room with the TV in the background, my phone rang. It was a message from Jess. "Eleanor just wanted to say thank you for everything. For giving us another chance, for teaching me that respect is the foundation of everything. I'm learning to be a better mother and a better daughter-in-law. Thank you." I read the message 3 times and cried, but not from sadness, from healing. I responded simply, "Thank you for listening and for changing." Because that's what really matters. Not instant forgiveness, not quick forgetting, but real change, sustained effort, respect that is built day by day. Do you know what the strangest thing is? Now that I see Ethan only 2 days a week, I enjoy every minute with him more. I'm not exhausted. I'm not resentful. I'm present, truly present. When I carry him, I don't think about how much my back hurts. I think about his laugh. When I read him a story, I'm not distracted calculating when I'll be able to leave. I'm there, living in that moment. I'm a better grandmother now that I have boundaries than when I didn't. And that's the greatest lesson I've learned. True love includes self-love. If you empty yourself completely for others, there's nothing genuine left to give. There's only obligation disguised as sacrifice. I was wrong for 18 months. I thought loving them meant disappearing. I thought being a good grandmother meant not having a life of my own. I thought setting boundaries was selfish. I was wrong. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival, it's dignity. It's the only way to build healthy relationships where everyone wins. Today I'm a grandmother 2 afternoons a week and I'm Eleanor the other 2 days. I read, I walk, I travel, I embroider, I exist. And Ethan doesn't have a resentful martyr counting the days until she can rest. He has a happy grandmother who arrives smiling, who leaves satisfied, who loves him unconditionally, but also loves herself. So, if you're reading this, if you feel invisible in your own family, if you've canceled your life to live it for others, if you've forgotten the last time you did something just for yourself, this is your sign. You're not a bad mother for setting limits. You're not a bad grandmother for having a life of your own. You're not selfish for saying, I can't, when you really can't. You're human, and you deserve respect, starting with your own. I gave up being invisible. I didn't give up being a grandmother. I didn't give up loving. I gave up destroying myself in the name of love, and that renunciation saved my life. Because true wealth isn't in what you give until you're empty. It's in keeping your soul intact while sharing from abundance, not from lack. Today, at 68, I finally understood something. You can love deeply without losing yourself along the way, and that balance, that equilibrium between giving and preserving yourself, is where true peace lives. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself reflected in any part of my confession, leave me a comment telling me where you're reading this from and what resonated with you. Like if you think someone else needs to hear this, and subscribe because I'll continue sharing true stories of women who learned that choosing themselves isn't betrayal, it's love. The most revolutionary love of all, because choosing yourself is the first step to loving others well. The end.